So, there's been a lot of talk in both mainstream and right wing media about President Trump's recent decision to authorize airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. So, to be clear, whether you support the decision or not, there's no legal ambiguity here. The president, as commander in chief, has the constitutional authority to act decisively when he perceives a threat to national security. That's not speculation, that's Article 2 of the Constitution. We're not talking about a ground war in Iraq 2.0. We're talking about targeted precision strikes on facilities that were actively developing the capacity to produce nuclear weapons. And also, these weren't secret facilities. They are known and monitored by both US intelligence and the IAEA. So what's changed? Trump saw that Iran was ramping up enrichment past the so-called JCPOA limits and made the call. Compare that to Biden's weakness, who sat on his hands as Iran funneled money into the proxies and terror networks. Trump's action wasn't a war declaration, it was a show of strength. Peace through strength, as Trump would say. Something America has lacked since 2021 when Biden took office. So here's the thing. Trump didn't act unilaterally in a vacuum. Contrary to leftist talking points, this wasn't some rogue move from a delusional warmonger. Trump consulted with his national security team, and reports suggest Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and DNI Rick Grenell were all briefed and aligned. This wasn't a cowboy moment, it was a coordinated hit. And most importantly, Trump didn't cross the constitutional Rubicon. He didn't launch a war. He executed a limited military strike against a nation actively enriching uranium towards weapons-grade levels. This is well within the executive's historical role. From Jefferson's Barbary Wars to Reagan's Libya strike, presidents have acted decisively without waiting for Congress to catch up. If anything, Trump's restraint, choosing targeted destruction over all-out assault, should be praised. But of course, the media screeches warmonger, while simultaneously ignoring Biden's drone strike in Afghanistan that killed children. So let's be real, they don't hate war. They hate Trump. This is selective outrage dressed up in an anti-war cloth. The American president has a duty to protect American interests and American lives. That includes preemptively striking facilities that could one day be used to blackmail or attack us, especially with a nuclear weapon. Now, the reality of the Iranian threat. Iran is not some misunderstood regional power. It's a theocratic dictatorship that chants death to America, death to Israel, death to the West. They sponsor terror across the globe. This is a regime that funds Hezbollah, props up Hamas, and bankrolls Houthi rebels in Yemen. Their fingerprints are all over attacks on American troops, oil tankers, and embassies. And yet we're supposed to believe that Trump was provocative for taking out 3 nuclear sites. The Obama administration gave these guys pallets of cash, then called it diplomacy. Trump hits their nuclear plants, and suddenly it's escalation. What escalation is allowing a terror-sponsoring regime to get nuclear weapons and use them as leverage over the West. What Trump did was send a signal that American weakness is not inevitable. This isn't about neocon fantasy or nation building. It's a deterrence. The same way Reagan deterred the Soviets by projecting strength, Trump is doing it with Iran. And the truth is, the only language tyrants understand is force, especially with someone as erratic as Iran. Diplomacy without the threat of consequences is just begging. And Trump doesn't beg, he acts. He's been saying Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon since 2011 as a private citizen. That's the difference between leadership and appeasement. Now, also, here's where things get complicated. And conservatives need to talk about it honestly, because not every MAGA voter is on board with what Trump did. Some, like Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, argue this kind of intervention betrays the America First doctrine. And I get the concern. We've been burned by foreign entanglements before, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, just to name a few. And we're tired of policing the world when we can't deal with our own domestic policies. But this wasn't that. This wasn't regime change. This wasn't a decade-long war. It was a precise military strike with a specific goal: cripple Iran's nuclear capacity. And let's not pretend like Iran's nuclear ambition is a distant problem. A nuclear-armed Iran changes the game for every ally we have in the region, including Israel, which happens to matter. The MAGA movement must be able to distinguish between neocon adventurism and strategic deterrence. If we can't, we cede the national security conversation to the left, and they've proven they'll do nothing but apologize to our enemies. Trump showed that strength and resilience, along with restraint, can go hand in hand. You can believe in America first and still believe in stopping your enemies from acquiring nuclear weapons. So the thing is, deterrence isn't just a strategy, it's a moral obligation when you're the world's last functioning superpower. Weakness is provocative. Just look at Biden's foreign policy. He let Afghanistan fall to the Taliban, appeased Iran with talks, and allowed China to surveil our skies with literal spy balloons. That's what happens when deterrence fails. Trump reversed that trend with one surgical move. And what's most telling is the reaction from the regime itself. They didn't escalate. Iran launched a pathetic volley of missiles, most of which missed or were intercepted. That's not retaliation, that's a PR stunt to save face. The real message is clear. They know they're vulnerable. They know Trump means business. And if you're a rogue nation watching this unfold, you're learning a valuable lesson. Push too hard and America will respond decisively. That's not a threat, that's a promise. In a dangerous world, deterrence is peace. Trump understands that, but the left does not. So now if we're going to talk about Iran's retaliation, or lack of one, after Trump took out their 3 nuclear facilities in a single night, no American casualties, Iran did what weak regimes always do. They fired off a few missiles into the desert, 14 rockets, 13 were intercepted, 1 hit near a US base but injured no one. That's not a show of strength. That's a toddler throwing a tantrum after being grounded. Trump called it very weak, and he was absolutely right. Iran wanted to save face domestically, so they lobbed a few missiles into the sand and called it a response. But let's not miss the message. They were terrified of doing more. But why? Because Trump reestablished deterrence. Under Biden, Iran was launching drone attacks on US troops with no consequences. Now they blink. This is what happens when America projects power instead of writing strongly worded letters from the UN. The Ayatollahs know Trump isn't bluffing. They remember Qasem Soleimani, they remember Baghdad, and now they remember Natanz, Esfahan, and Fordo. That's what deterrence looks like. Also, Trump's statement post-strike wasn't just about military action. It was pure geopolitical messaging. Iran fired missiles, we destroyed their nuke sites. They blinked, thank you for not escalating. It was brutal and brilliant. While the media was crying about Trump being provocative, he was reshaping the entire narrative of U.S. strength. Conservatives like me care about results, not optics. But even the optics here were fantastic. Iran looked small, Trump looked large, and the world of global power politics, perception matters. This isn't a game of checkers, it's chess. And Trump made the Ayatollah look like a pawn. The strike was over in hours. There was no endless war, no invasion, just pure, unfiltered precision and dominance. That's how you make foreign policy work, peace through strength, by making it clear to your enemies that the cost of aggression is greater than the reward. Reagan did it, Trump just did it again. So, of course, as usual, our friends on the left lost its collective mind. CNN rolled out every ex-Obama bureaucrat who still has a security clearance to tell us that Trump had provoked World War III. MSDNC, or as they're actually called MSNBC, brought out former CIA officers turned Twitter grifters to lecture us about international norms. But guess what? None of that matters. Because for all their whining, Iran didn't do a damn thing. It was really World War III. Why is Tehran still standing? Why are US troops unharmed? Why is the stock market up and oil prices stabilizing? Because they were wrong. Again. Just like they were wrong about the embassy move to Jerusalem, wrong about Soleimani, and wrong about the Abraham Accords. President Trump isn't reckless. He's calculated. And the meltdown we saw from the press wasn't based on facts. It was based on hatred. Hatred for a man that makes decisive choices instead of forming a committee to study the problem for years and years. Honestly, one of the most underappreciated aspects of this strike was the message it sent to our allies and enemies alike. Israel saw it as a green light to finish what they started with Hezbollah. Saudi Arabia saw it as a reassurance that America still has a spine. But meanwhile, China and Russia took notice too. Beijing saw a president who will actually do more than lecture them over trade deals. Moscow saw a man who acts without warning and doesn't care about press approval. That changes the calculus. Trump isn't just playing domestic politics, he's reshaping how power is exercised across the globe. Strategic messaging isn't just about being polite, it's about being undeniable. And in that sense, Trump just reminded the world that America is still the world's lone superpower when it chooses to be. It took one night and 3 destroyed nuclear plants to say it out loud and clear. So in just 48 hours, Trump did more to restore American deterrence than Biden did in 4 years of groveling. And this is the lesson conservatives need to hammer home. You don't get peace through weakness. You don't deter your enemies by inviting them to climate summits. You deter them by making sure they know exactly what happens when they cross the line. Under Biden, the line didn't exist. Under Trump, the line is made of 30,000-pound bunker busters. That's not warmongering, that's realism. And realism is what keeps our troops alive, our enemies in check, and our allies confident. Whether you're MAGA, traditional conservative, or just someone who's tired of American decline, you should be able to see that this wasn't a reckless act. It was the restoration of a doctrine we abandoned too long ago. America first, backed by overwhelming strength. The left won't say it, so we must. Alright, so as usual when it comes to President Trump trolling, him saying "make Iran great again" line, the media spun it like he was calling for a regime change. But here's the thing. He didn't say the US should overthrow Iran's government. What he said essentially was, if the people of Iran want freedom, we'll support them, but we're not sending in troops. That's not neoconservatism. That's a populist twist on Reagan-era liberty promotion. Trump's not launching democracy crusades like the Bush administration did. He's laying down a simple principle. If the Iranian people overthrow their evil regime, that's a win for the world. But we're not footing the bill or shedding American blood to make it happen. The left and some MAGA purists conflate everything into either full intervention or a total isolationism. Trump isn't buying either narrative. He's threading the needle, support freedom rhetorically, crush nuclear threats militarily, but stay out of endless wars. And to be honest, so far, it has actually worked, even though I initially opposed intervention at all. This is where the conservative movement finds itself fractured. On one side, you've got the old guard neocons who never saw a Middle Eastern regime they didn't want to bomb. On the other, you've got a new generation of populist conservatives saying, fix the border before you fix Baghdad. And then there's Trump straddling both camps. This frustrates people, but maybe it's time we admit something. That foreign policy isn't black and white. Trump's approach is selectively aggressive. It's not neoconservatism, it's not Rand Paul isolationism, it's transactional nationalism. And that's not a weakness, it's a strength. What's best for America? That's the only lens. Regime change? Only if it costs us nothing and makes us safer. Military strikes? Only when they actually achieve deterrence. So when Trump says he supports the Iranian people, he means morally, not militarily. And if the Ayatollahs fall, great. But if they don't, he'll still keep them in check with or without regime change. So just to be totally clear so there's no confusion, the Iranian regime, as it is right now, is evil. They jail women for removing headscarves, they fund Hamas, they burn churches and synagogues. So if we're judging regimes by moral bankruptcy, Iran would be top 5 every year. So yes, morally speaking, any change would be better. But President Trump understands something the neocon crowd refuses to admit. Moral clarity doesn't equal strategic clarity. So just because a regime is bad doesn't mean removing it is good for us. If you look at Iraq, look at Libya, look at Syria. You'll break it, you buy it. And unless you're willing to occupy Tehran for 20 years and rebuild it, we better hope the Iranian people can rise up on their own. And this is exactly what President Trump is saying. He's not rooting for the regime, he's rooting for the people. But rooting from the sidelines, not from the cockpit of a stealth bomber. And honestly, that's the only rational position. Now, if we want to talk about consequences, let's talk about what Iran is doing to itself. Their economy is in freefall. Sanctions are crushing them. Foreign investment has vanished. The rial is worthless. And now they're losing nuclear assets that took years to build. That's not foreign pressure, that's self-harm. And here's the kicker. China is watching closely. If you think Beijing is going to let its oil partner collapse without extracting leverage, no way. But China also knows it can't protect a client state that gets flattened in 24 hours by an American strike. So Iran's bet on playing East against West is starting to backfire. Trump just raised the price of doing business with Tehran, and China doesn't do business with the losing side. So if Iran continues down this path, they won't just face isolation from the West, they'll face abandonment from the East. And that's how you win geopolitical chess without a full invasion. So now as far as President Trump's concern goes, his position is not cowardice, it's clarity. It's the balance every real conservative should be fighting for. Stand for freedom, don't fight everyone else's wars. That's not contradictory, that's principled. The United States should always promote liberty as an ideal. but we should not waste blood and treasure unless our national interests are directly on the line. That's the America First foreign policy we were promised. And for all the criticism Trump takes, he's the first president in decades to actually deliver on it. He crushed ISIS without an occupation. He confronted Iran without a ground war. He hit hard, then offered peace. That's how adults operate. Compare that to Biden, who begged Iran for a deal while their proxies killed our troops. One path shows weakness, the other shows strength. Trump shows the latter. And in doing so, he reminded the world and our unfractured conservative base that moral clarity means nothing without strategic discipline. While the media obsesses over Iranian airstrikes, Americans are dying in a war that's not halfway across the globe. It's right at our southern border. And no, that's not hyperbole. The cartels aren't just gangs. They're organized, militarized, and more lethal than most terrorist networks. Fentanyl overdoses killed over 100,000 Americans last year, including 5 of my friends, actually. Although it wasn't intentional, it was still a result of Biden's open border policy. So there you go. It hit me directly. I'm sure it's hit many of your friends and family as well. That's not a drug issue. That's chemical warfare being waged by Mexican cartels with the help of the Chinese Communist Party. And what's the federal government doing? Almost nothing. Biden dismantled Trump's immigration enforcement infrastructure in his first 100 days. No more Remain in Mexico. No more wall construction. No more ICE interior enforcement. Meanwhile, cartel-linked human trafficking has exploded. And you want to talk about national security? These aren't just families crossing. We've caught Iranian nationals, CCP affiliates, and even terror suspects. But go ahead, leftists. Tell us more about how compassionate open borders are. Americans are dying, communities are being flooded with drugs, and our sovereignty is vanishing. But yeah, sure, let's worry about Syria, let's worry about Yemen. The real war is here, and we're not even fighting back. So just to get some perspective on what I mean, Iran has killed Americans. Sure, Soleimani has blood on his hands. But let's be honest, no foreign enemy has killed more Americans in the last decade than the Mexican cartels. Fentanyl, heroin, meth. They don't just appear in small-town America. They're smuggled in by highly coordinated, well-funded networks that operate with impunity just miles from Texas. And under Biden, it's open season. The southern border is a conveyor belt of crime and poison. So where's the outrage? Where are the drone strikes? Where's the outrage from the same Democrats who want us to police the world but won't lift a finger to stop massive death in their own backyard? Trump was the first president in decades to call the cartels what they are, terrorists. He proposed designating them as foreign terrorist organizations. He proposed direct strikes on cartel infrastructure, and left lost its mind. Why? Because to them, sovereignty doesn't matter. Borders don't matter. But you can't have a nation if you don't have a border. That's not a suggestion. That's a law of civilization. And you'll have these idiot leftists that'll say no one is illegal on foreign land. It's unbelievable, and it's getting all of our people killed. Here's where foreign policy and domestic policy collide. You can't have a strong America abroad if your homeland is collapsing. And President Trump understands this. That's why he's been hammering the message of mass deportations, interior enforcement, and cartel dismantling. But this is where some of his own base splits. Some MAGA voices praised the Iran strike but asked, why not use that same force on the cartels? And it's a fair question. If you can take out a bunker 7,000 miles away, why can't you take out a meth lab 70 miles of El Paso? The answer lies in political will. It's not that we can't. It's that the Biden administration and even some weak Republicans don't want to. They are more scared of being called racist than they are of actual mass death. But Trump isn't. He proved with ICE raids, Title 42, and the National Guard deployment that he's willing to fight this war. What conservatives need to demand now is consistency. The same strength abroad must be applied at home. Otherwise, we're winning battles overseas and losing the war for our own country. Here's a fact that no one wants to say out loud. Mass deportation is not extreme. It's overdue. We have millions of illegal immigrants living in this country, many of whom are tied to criminal networks, document fraud, or welfare dependency. This is not sustainable. Trump said he'll deport millions if re-elected, and the media lost their minds. But guess what? That's what nations do. That's what the law looks like. You don't get to break into someone's house, demand health care, and then accuse them of cruelty when they call the cops. We have a moral obligation to protect American citizens first. Every dollar spent on housing, schooling, and medically treating illegal immigrants is a dollar stolen from our veterans, our children, and our seniors. Deportation isn't about cruelty, it's about sovereignty. And if that's controversial in 2025, that says more about our decay than it does about President Trump. We either start acting like a nation again, or we stop pretending we are one. And President Trump, for all his flaws, is the one who said that out loud, regardless of the way the left slanders him. Look, I'm not saying to ignore foreign policy. I'm saying to put it in proper perspective. Iran doesn't have soldiers pouring across our border every night. The cartels do. Hamas didn't kill 100,000 Americans last year. Fentanyl did. China isn't flying migrants into Arizona by the thousands. Mexican coyotes are. And yet, we've got an entire political class obsessed with managing foreign democracies and ignoring their own backyard. That's insane. Conservatives must demand a reordering of priorities. We can stop Iran from going nuclear, and we can stop the cartels. We can drone strike Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo, and still deport illegals. These aren't either-or choices. They're parallel obligations. America first doesn't mean America only, but it does mean America first. And until we get serious about defending our own soil, every foreign strike, no matter how successful, will feel hollow. But President Trump gets that. It's time every conservative in the country does too. As far as American decline goes, let's start with the number one culprit, the universities. Colleges used to be places where you learned how to think. Now they teach you what to think. And what they're teaching is straight-up Marxist poison, gender ideology, racial grievance politics, and anti-American revisionism. Students don't leave college with marketable skills. They leave with a chip on their shoulder, a pile of debt, and a degree in gender studies. Red states are finally starting to wake up. Florida, Texas, and Utah are stripping CRT, DEI, and gender theory from public universities. They're restoring civics, the Constitution, and including the Federalist Papers. And predictably, the left is howling, "Censorship," they scream. But here's the thing. When you use taxpayer money to push radical propaganda, the taxpayers have every right to shut it down. This isn't censorship, this is accountability. And if you're mad that students are no longer being taught that America is evil, well, that sucks. Too bad. Go to your own private Marxist university, but we're done funding it on taxpayer dollars. Woke LGBTQIA plus MS-13 and all this other nonsense isn't just schools, it's Hollywood too. The entertainment industry now functions like a woke ministry of propaganda. Every historical character gets race or gender swapped. Every superhero becomes a DEI checkbox. Every new show is a thinly veiled lecture on climate change, colonialism, or how bad white people are. And if you object, you're a bigot. You're fragile. You're on the wrong side of history. All nonsense. All about representation, it's about control. It's about rewriting history to fit a left-wing worldview. No one minds a diverse cast, as far as I know. What people mind is when a story gets thrown out the window to accommodate identity politics. And now the backlash is building. Audiences are tuning out. Disney is hemorrhaging money. Netflix is losing subscribers. Because at some point, people just want good stories, not sermons, from the left. The left thought they could remake culture by brute force. But the more they push, the more they lose. People are waking up. The culture war isn't over, and it's honestly just beginning. And here we are again. Let's talk about the most grotesque part of the modern leftists, abortion. In 2024, over 1 million unborn children were killed in the womb. This is not healthcare, that's murder. Life begins at conception. That's not a religious belief, it's biology. And what do Democrats want? Abortion up to the point of birth. In some states, they flirted with post-birth abortion. So let that sink in. This is child sacrifice for the god of convenience. And it's dressed up as a choice. No, it's not a choice to kill a baby. It's evil. And if we're going to claim any moral legitimacy as a society, this is a line in the sand. Roe v. Wade being overturned was a massive victory, but it was only the beginning. We need federal protections for the unborn. We need parental consent laws. We need to defund Planned Parenthood and punish clinics that perform late-term abortions. The Republican Party cannot continue to be neutral here. If we can cave on life, we lose the soul of our movement. Honestly, Planned Parenthood should have been fully defunded as soon as we found out that they were selling babies' body parts. How are they still around? So the LGBTQIA plus MS-13 movement has gone from live and let live to affirm or be destroyed. It's no longer about tolerance. It's about indoctrination, especially in public schools. Kindergartners are being taught that gender is a social construct. Middle schoolers are being asked what their pronouns are. And high schoolers are encouraged to transition. But if parents push back, they're labeled abusers. This is insane, and it's still continuing even under Trump's administration. Kids aren't allowed to buy cough syrup without permission, but they can be put on puberty blockers, including Lupron, that chemically castrates sex offenders. Teachers are told to hide gender transitions from their parents. This isn't education, it's grooming. It's the state stepping between children and their families. And Republicans need to stop being afraid of this issue. Ban gender ideology from classrooms, fire teachers who promote it, pull funding from any school that lets it happen. The nuclear family is the bedrock of society, and the left is blowing it up. We either stop them or lose the next generation. And I understand that all of the other political things in culture and the world are important at the moment, but we're still mutilating our kids, even though there has been a federal ban of the gender transition of minors.